Hi everyone, it's Rabbi Dr. Jack Cohen with the Dating Shalom Bayis series. Today I'm going to touch on a very interesting subject, which is the area of second marriage. Someone needs to get married, would like to get married after a divorce, or chas v'shalom, God forbid, they lost a loved one. I deal with this quite a bit, and if you need my help in this area or any area in dating and shalom bayis, please feel free to reach out to me from anywhere in the world if you'd like a consultation on getting married again, getting matched to someone to get married again, or need an issue resolved in dating, such as putting together a top 10 list, or have a shalom bayis issue, or would like to consider remarriage. You can reach me at 305-206-1916. These are issues that I love to tackle and deal with, and I'd be happy to hear your situation and guide you appropriately. Here we go, second marriages. Here's the wisdom you need to succeed the second time around. In a perfect world, men and women would marry, live long and happy lives together, and leave this world at about the same time. But we all know we don't live in a perfect world, far from it. There would be no need for second marriages, but we live in a world that is far from perfect. People sometimes die young, leaving behind grieving spouses with potentially long lives ahead of them. And too many marriages simply don't last and collapse into divorce. Having served myself as a mentor for the past 30 years, I've seen it all. Second marriages that thrive, second marriages that are doomed from the start, second marriages wrecked by children, second marriages in which the children from both sides fuse together into a happy and cooperative unit, second marriages that collapse under financial strain, and second marriages that endure but unhappily. Just recently, in the last 60 days, I've dealt with a situation where one of my dear clients and students who had 8 children, actually in the past year, got remarried to someone who was divorced with 1 child. It can work. This was an amazing situation, but that's where people get together and are able to pitch their tent, so to speak, and put their differences aside to really make it work. And I had a scenario recently where I gave a presentation at a singles event this past summer, and I met a woman who was married several times. The second time, what happened was she divorced because she and the husband had a great relationship, but the warring children created serious problems and breaches for them to the point they couldn't remain married, so they had to divorce because the children didn't make it easy for the step-parents. Interestingly, the divorce rate among second marriages is higher than among first marriages. One would think that an individual who's gone through a divorce would have learned his lesson or learned her lesson, and will therefore not repeat the mistakes of the past. Alas, it's far from the case. Those who marry the first time to fulfill certain needs but are not prepared to give in return usually marry or remarry with the same intent the next time around. The second marriage becomes nothing more than a walk down the same road, a courtship leading to a fresh disaster, fresh only because it involves a new partner, but they didn't learn their lesson in life, that they had issues with regards to having certain needs. You don't go into a marriage to fulfill your needs. You go into a marriage because you'd like to apply the principle of what the word love means in Hebrew. Love in Hebrew is ahava. The shorish, or the root of the word, is the 2 letters in the middle, rahav, which means to give. If you go into marriage with the idea of giving, you stand a great chance of success. But if you have a little list there, or a large list of what you'd like to get out of it, you have problems. And certainly if you haven't learned your lesson from the first divorce. Sometimes another questionable pattern is at work. One who leaves a marriage because of financial instability may, for example, try to find a new partner who offers the promise of financial security. The same is true of the other significant marital issues, such as sexual fulfillment, lack of emotional connectedness or communication, problems with the in-laws, etc. Since the spouse left the marriage because of a particular problem, he or she understandably wants to ensure they won't have to contend with the same problem all over again. But life often plays funny tricks on us, doesn't it? The second time newlywed finds out, often after it's too late, that the new spouse is indeed different from the first spouse. And while the new spouse may have what the first spouse lacked, they also lack what the first spouse had. So all you do is find yourself trading 6 for half a dozen. Following divorce, does it make sense for someone who has failed to marry again? Hardly anyone considers this question seriously, and even though we know the answer in advance, it is wise to give this question some thought. Though it's generally true that it takes 2 to tango and only 1 to untango, there's hardly a divorce in which the breakup is exclusively the domain or the fault of one of the partners. Everyone plays a role or contributes to the demise of a marriage. So it behooves any divorced person to engage in serious soul searching before remarrying, to contemplate what will be done differently so that the next marriage will endure. If you don't change your behavior, you're just going to encounter the same results, which is another failed marriage. So you have to do a little soul searching, a little musar cheshbon nefesh, an accounting of the soul. Where did I go wrong? And don't deny that you didn't have anything to do with it, because we're all culpable to some extent in the demise of a marriage. Ask yourself, what did I do wrong, and how have I corrected that bad quality? How have I limited that, as we say in Hebrew, the chisaron, the deficiency? Anyone who fails to do this before remarrying is irresponsible and not ready for remarriage. One who cannot recognize their mistakes and learn from them is bound to repeat them. This common sense observation falls into the general theme of loving your fellow as yourself, which is Talmudically understood as the obligation to engage in the type of activity that will enhance the viability of a new marriage or a remarriage. Following death. A second marriage following the death of one's spouse poses other challenges. One may wrestle with various emotions when contemplating remarriage. The unease can affect one's ability to remarry even years after the death. It is odd that many people are more likely to question a marriage following the death of a spouse than one following a divorce. The key element in this upside down reaction is the loyalty factor. No loyalty is expected towards a divorced spouse, but loyalty is expected towards the deceased spouse. I recently got an email from an individual who wanted to remarry after being married for 40 some odd years. His wife passed away, and the question he had to me was like this: was I being unloyal if I were to remarry, and then who would I be buried next to, my first wife or my second wife? They're very good questions. I had to put it up to my poskim, to my halachic decisors, some great rabbis that I know, and I came to understand that the halacha is that the requirement is you remarry, you're buried with the person who you had children with, the most children with. Okay, now, there are those who regard remarrying as an act of betrayal, but if loyalty means maintaining whatever was built in the first marriage, it is entirely likely that the surviving partner can more successfully accomplish this with an understanding new partner. Another faulty perception is that a remarriage reflects negatively on the former spouse. A good first marriage naturally begets a second marriage. If anything, remarrying gives testimony, credibility to how good the first marriage was, good enough to warrant another marriage. So it's not to be looked at in a negative light, but actually positive. If you're remarrying, that means you were successful the first time. Loyalty needs to be viewed from a Torah perspective. Clearly, the Torah mandate is to marry and not give marriage a try. It is to be married. Let me repeat that. The Torah mandate to marry is not to give marriage a try. They want you to marry. If a first marriage is terminated, the imperative to marry remains. How can the fulfillment of a Torah mandate not be considered loyal? Children. A second marriage, similar to a first marriage, should not be hurried into. This is especially important because of the many factors present in second marriages that are usually not present in first marriages. The most obvious of these is children. I know that I was involved in a shidduch recently with an outstanding couple, and the man has 2 daughters, and we had planned, for example, a wedding date, but we had to push it back a little bit because he felt that the children weren't ready yet to accept the new wife. So taking into consideration your children is critical. Children of all ages are vulnerable, some in different ways, following either their parents' divorce or the death of a parent. This vulnerability can be manifested in a child viewing the potential newcomer to the family as an intruder, threatening to take away the time and affection of the parent upon whom the child relies. So this requires careful consideration. The remarrying parent needs to make a genuine effort to understand and address the child's concerns. You have to understand their vulnerability, their concern, their worries. This is best achieved by listening carefully to the children, acknowledging that their worries are not crazy, wild ruminations, and assuring him or her that they'll always be loved, you'll always be looked after. It helps even more if the newcomer goes out of their way to befriend the child, the new stepmother or stepfather, and does things with them together, with the biological parent together. Actions that reinforce words go a long way. As we say, actions speak louder than words. A newcomer must never come into a family with the attitude that they're replacing the parent. That's not happening. The proper attitude is that the new spouse is joining the family out of love for the children's parent, and is therefore deeply committed to doing what is best for the stepchildren, and need to demonstrate that in actions. Children are a potential block to remarriage, but they don't have to be. It helps if the children realize that it is important for the parent to be happy. Parenting always works better in happiness than in melancholy. Children will be the prime beneficiaries of the parental happiness. So explain to your child that if I remarry, I'll be a happier person, which means I'll be a happier parent for you. When parents are happy, children can prosper and thrive. It's important also for the children to realize that their parent has an ongoing mandate to be married, and that remarriage is therefore a Torah-based endeavor and commandment. Explain to the children that I have a Torah mandate to be married, and as a result it's a mitzvah for me to marry. This realization can help to neutralize potential resistance to remarriage by the children. Younger children are less likely to be able to appreciate this. Unfortunately, even older children, adults, do not automatically embrace this great attitude right away. It takes time. Many children make up their minds in advance, sight unseen, that they will not like their stepfather or stepmother. Even if they can point to some objectionable character trait of the stepparent, it doesn't justify behaving disdainfully towards the new spouse, nor does it excuse their doing whatever possible to disrupt the new marriage. First, as is codified by Jewish law, children are obligated to extend respect to the new spouse as part of the respect that is due to their parents. Second, and perhaps more to the point, is the meaning of the famous cited obligation to love one's fellow as yourself. This is considered, if not the most fundamental principle of the Torah. If we are serious about being Torah-observant Jews, we can't ignore any detail, least of all the foundation of the Torah, which is v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love everyone as you would love yourself. So we need to impart this to the children. In his outstanding book, Pleioetz, which means wondrous advice, the great Rabbi Reza Papo from Yugoslavia observes that the Torah obligation to love others is not necessarily when dealing with close friends. There, the love is automatically there. And a Torah directive is hardly required to get you to love someone like you love yourself. The directive to love someone else as yourself is necessary when dealing with someone you do not like. It is specifically here that the Torah instruction to love one's fellow Jew is needed. For children who, for whatever reason, do not like the step-parent, the imperative to love others is crucial, assuming they are mature enough to appreciate this mitzvah. This is not to suggest that it is a one-way relationship. The step-parent is also apt to dislike children. She or he is certainly prone to not like them as much as their own children. But the directive you shall love works both ways, from children to step-parent and from step-parent to children. When the commandment to love others is the operating framework, a second marriage can not only survive, it can thrive and benefit everyone. When it is not the operating framework, problems abound. And though solutions can be found, they are usually only band-aids. Everyone involved should try taking the high road, the accepting approach. As it says in the Torah, "Derecheha darchei noam, v'chol netivoteha shalom." Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths lead to peace. With the former, everyone is a winner. Finances are often a sticky point in second marriages. The newlyweds bring in their own financial resources and obligations to the new reality. Ideally, it is best if the couple fuses everything together as one, instead of creating the threshold division of mine, yours, and ours. Sometimes it's not practical, especially if funds are legally designated for the children of one of the spouses. The most prudent arrangement is for each spouse to agree, happily, not to touch those designated funds that are been set aside for one of the spouse's children. But it is likely less than prudent to insist on strict yours-mine formula, wherein the new husband, for example, refuses to have anything to do with the expenses of the new wife's children. One common area is the tuitions of the children that the wife brings into the marriage. That will likely spill over into a distant, hands-off relationship with the stepchildren, which is also the first step toward marital calamity. One remains in entirety, not in parts. I tried to set up a woman who had been married for many, many years, had many children, divorced, with an individual who himself, I think he was a widower, but he made a very, very disturbing requirement. That he loves to travel, and he would require that she has to pay her own way, and he has to pay his way. When I heard that, red flags went off. I said to my client, to change the name, Joni, and that doesn't sound right. You know, when he signs the ksuva, he takes it upon himself to take care of you, to sustain you financially, to clothe you and everyone else. But he's requiring, you got to find a way to come up with your own air ticket, and I come up with mine. And as a result, they went their separate ways. Okay, the former spouse, which is in a divorce case. The former spouse is often a sore point in the new marriage. This is usually a reflection of the relationship that the newly married individual has with the former spouse. Though it might be far-fetched to expect that the relationship with one ex be very good, it doesn't have to be bad. It could be functional. We may have, God forbid, been divorced, but we need to learn how to be civil and get along. It is unfair for the innocent newcomer to the family to be dragged into old messes. In the Jewish way of thinking, the relationship with one's former spouse is subject to specific requirements under the heading of, and from your own kin or own flesh, do not be oblivious, which means you can't dismiss your ex. Even though you're not married to them anymore, you still have to treat them nice and civil. Marriage is forever, even after divorce. And the obligation to be a mensch pertains even after divorce. This is true even if the divorcing couple has no children, and certainly prevails when there are children. The elementary halachic logic in this is as follows. A couple who do not get along after divorce or when married invariably put the children into the uncomfortable position of having to choose sides. How often do we see this? Especially when I deal with people who want to be married and they come to me to get matched up and get help with that. And we talk about the children. How many of them don't talk to the person that is sitting in front of me, whether it's the woman or the man, because one side decides to pit the children against the ex. The children are then forced into violating their obligation to honor and respect both of their parents. What a shame. The sparring ex-spouses thus transgress the all-encompassing and morally powerful exhortation from the Torah not to put stumbling blocks in front of the blind, which is your children. Striving to get along after divorce is not only sensible, it's halachically required. The former deceased spouse. Obviously, the new partner should respect the memory of the deceased spouse. On the other hand, the remarrying spouse must recognize that his or her primary responsibility is now to the new marital partner. No one wants to be in a second place situation. The remarrying partner needs to be sensitive to this. Neither the husband nor the wife should overtly engage in a mournful activity that conveys that the first partner is still actively present in the heart of the surviving spouse. Which activities are thereby precluded is a matter of dispute in Jewish law, but I know of a great rabbi that I helped, and I created a shidduch for him several years ago because his wife passed away, and he asked me for help in that. After he remarried his wife, he ripped out the kitchen, he redecorated the bedroom. He wanted his new wife to walk in and feel she wasn't living in the memory of his former wife. It's critical that that new person in your life feel like they're part of you, and they're not just walking through a path of the memory of the former husband or wife. As stated earlier, regarding all the unique challenges of a second marriage, choosing the ways of pleasantness is the best option. This approach brings out the best in the couple. The joy and fulfillment of the marital relationship will then spill over to the entire family. Being sensitive, especially in trying circumstances, rather than being selfish and self-centered, is the most vital ingredient in assuring marital success. Again, if anyone needs help out there, anywhere in the world, on second marriages or dating in any way, whether you'd like for me to evaluate a shidduch for you, or help in shalom bayis, or get help in putting a top 10 list together, or need help in putting a resume together, or evaluating any issue dating or marriage, please feel free to reach out to me from anywhere in the world, 305-206-1916, or drjackcohen18 @gmail.com.